Well, welcome to session 2 of our study of the books of Samuel. And today we're still in chapter 1, and I've asked Linda to give us a real quick 1-minute recap of last week. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I was asked to summarize last week's blog. We were given a little background of the history of the books of Samuel, how they came to be, but then a lot about the early characters in it, such as Hannah, her husband Elkanah, and Peninnah. Since these characters play a major part in the drama that will unfold, we were given this background to build from. Having the preliminaries dealt with, we can now launch into where they're taking it.
All right, cool. Thank you. And I think we left off with Yolanda last week. Yolanda, would you start us off today by reading chapter 1, verses 12 through 14?
Hey. As she prayed to the Lord, Eli watched her, seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound. He thought she had been drinking. "Must you come here drunk?" he demanded. "Throw away your wine."
All right. So far, Eli has been named as a priest located at the entrance of the temple, sitting in the chief priest's chair. And just so you know, high priest and chief priest are two different things. The chief priest was the sort of the head of the priests, where the high priest was the one that got to go into inside the holy of holies, things like that. So a little different. He was the chief priest, and so we met him. He was sitting in his chair at the temple gates, but now for the first time he speaks, and he does not make a very good impression. Whether with respect to his power of observation or to his appraisal of the situation, having observed Hannah's mouth moving without making any sound, Eli assumes that she is drunk. Hannah, however, is quick to correct Eli's misinterpretation. And Tim, would you read verses 15 and 18?
Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him.
Okay. So she replies to him, not so. Notice that even though she rebukes him, she does so with great respect. So that which would, of course, be appropriate. Not so, my lord. I'm a woman who's deeply troubled. I've not been drinking wine or beer. Interesting, they had beer back then. Never realized that you always hear about wine in the Old Testament. You don't really hear about beer. But according to this translation, they had beer. The only thing being poured out is my soul to the Lord. Hannah is particularly concerned that Eli not misjudge her as a wicked woman. Ironically, while Hannah does not deserve such an epithet, Eli's own sons were very much do and are explicitly branded. So when we meet them in chapter 2, Eli may be obtuse, but he's not unkind to Hannah. Hannah responds differentially to Eli and then departs and eats something, which is significant because remember that before all this, she had refused to eat. and her face is no longer downcast. Nothing has yet materially changed, or even has had time to materially change in Hannah's circumstances, but she appears both comforted for having poured out her heart to God and encouraged by Eli's blessing.
She must have had a sense that the Lord had heard her. You know, this wasn't just wishful thinking.
Yeah.
You know, she put action to her reaction.
Yeah, and to bring it kind of into context, it shows the mere fact of pouring out your troubles to God can make you feel better. I think this is a great little example of where that's the case. She is so overcome with grief. Remember, the Bible says this going to Shiloh and this festival, this had repeated itself year after year, the same event. But now something changes. Now Hannah comes to the point where she just lets go and just pours her heart out to the Lord at the temple. Jim, we're to you for verses 19 and 20.
Early the next morning, they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him.
All right. Well, we kind of knew that this was going to happen, and everything was pointing there. But Hannah seemed to have grown confidence from her encounter at the temple, and Hannah's confidence was well founded, because in due course the Lord, who had closed her womb, remembered her, and she conceives. She bears a son, and that son she names Samuel, explaining that she asked the Lord for him. Okay. Peggy, would you read 21 through 28, please?
Okay. When the man Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the animal sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you. Do what seems best to you, Elkanah, her husband told her. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I ask of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there.
All right. So this is kind of an interesting turn here. Hannah's story is not complete until her obedience to her vow is recorded. When next Elkanah went up with his family to offer the annual sacrifice, Hannah did not go, citing as grounds her desire to wean the child first. In the ancient Near East, children were typically weaned at about 3 years of age. And as Abraham's great feast at the time of Isaac's weaning suggests, such occasions were celebrated. So there's a big to-do on the third birthday of a child, because it's in Jewish culture, because it's the weaning.
I find it more astonishing that a 3-year-old is given away to this priest. You know, that would be hard to give up. Gee whiz.
Yeah. Now, this is interesting. It says, do what seems best to you, her husband, Elkanah told her. Elkanah's response to Hannah may suggest some growth in his appreciation of her situation, in contrast to his short-sightedness and helplessness. Here he adopts a more supportive stance. After he was weaned, she took Samuel, the boy, with her and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. The account of Hannah's fulfillment of her vows raises various small questions. Did she bring 3 bulls, or, as it seems more likely, a 3-year-old bull? On the noteworthy fourfold repetition in verse 27 and 28, concluding with Hannah's statement that for his whole life he shall be given over to the Lord, whatever the uncertainties with respect to detail, the text clearly means us to understand that Hannah fulfilled her vows and entrusted Samuel to Eli for the service of the Lord. What I'm curious to think is, what do you think of Eli's response to all this? Because for me, here Hannah had no children. He loved her, and now she finally gives him a son, one of the greatest gifts a wife can give you, and she gives him away at 3 years old, and he doesn't flinch an eye. What do you think? What's your opinion of that?
You know, maybe after all those years of her crying and not eating and him kind of just not seeming to do very much of anything about it, maybe he just got to the point where he was just like, I'm just going to let her do whatever she wants to do. And maybe he felt as though she just had the right to do what she wanted to with the child.
When he asked her why she was crying, what we read earlier in chapter 1, why she was crying, and wasn't the fact that she had him better than 10 sons. And so I'm still perplexed by it, but it feels very nonchalant. One, that she's finally gotten a child, finally gotten the son that she wanted, and it's another son for him, from the woman that he loves. And so I have to believe it's not nonchalant, but it certainly seems like it.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. I would think that he would be just overwhelmed with joy to have the son from her, from the his original wife who went through all this. But the commentator here, of course, theorizes that it could be the fact that he is now supporting Hannah no matter what. His support is, and if this is what Hannah, and don't forget, he is a believer in God and a follower of God. And so, I'm sure in 3 years she has told him the story of how she had made a vow with God, and it was God that gave her the son, that gave them the son, and she promised God, and she was going to keep her promise. So, it could be just out of his faith that he, there's no indication otherwise.
Well, maybe he just finally caught on that this was no common incident here. You know, all that Hannah went through to finally get Samuel, and the miraculous nature of his birth, maybe he finally got it. Wait a minute, this is something special here, and especially with Hannah being an example of devotion, this is for something here. He may have caught on. I'm not going to get in God's way. He's up to something here.
It's a surprising reaction, but if you think about it, he may have had, the same reaction to Hannah, that, hey, this was a deal made with God, that God came through, so we're going to come through. Yeah. Now let's talk about her giving him to Eli. I mean, she has met Eli one time, and he kind of accused her of being a drunk woman, and now she goes back and she actually gives. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think it speaks to her faithfulness, but also I feel like there's a bit of redemption in there for her with Eli, redemption of her reputation, even though he realizes in that moment, trusts what she says, but there's still some, I feel like there's still some reputational redemption there.
I also think that given those times, I mean, they really had a great deal of respect for the synagogue, the temple, and all of the laws surrounding it, and what happens there. So she said she would turn him over to the Lord, and for them, that temple represented him. So Eli, he was there. So I think she was really turning him over to the Lord. And no matter who had been in the temple, she would have given Samuel to them. Just so happens that Eli was the head of everything. So it made sense she would give him to him.
Yeah, I think you just hit it, the key there. It was Eli's position, really, not the person of Eli. It was his position. If she gave him to serve in the temple for the rest of his life, the only person who would be able to make that happen is Eli, as the chief priest. He was in charge of the temple, basically. Okay. He was the administrator of the temple. That's what the chief priest was. The high priest was the head of the spiritual leadership of the temple. And chief priest was the associate pastor, so to speak. Okay. Where the high priest was the pastor. And Eli was going to make it happen. He was able to raise Samuel with his other two sons, which, he gets the other two sons as brothers, which is not the greatest thing in the world for Samuel, but as we'll see, but yet that he grows up in the temple and he serves. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm going to summarize. That's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to go ahead and summarize chapter 1. If how stories begin is an important indication of where they intend to go, beginning the grand story of Israel's transition from tribal confederacy to monarchical society, with the story of an everyday woman's personal pain, may seem an unnecessary delay in getting on with what is truly important. But to think this would be quite wrong. For the story of Hannah provides an essential orientation to the dynamics of the book of Samuel as a whole. First, her story signals that individual actors and individual actions are significant, often well beyond the lifetime of the individual. Provoked by a rival wife, misunderstood by a well-meaning but hapless husband, misjudged by her religious leaders, Hannah models how a God-fearing person is to respond under pressure. She resists fighting her rival. She resists fleeing to an empty comfort Elkanah offers. She even resists taking offense at the obtuseness of Eli. Instead, she takes her burden to God, implying that she understands that He alone carries enough weight to meet her need. What Hannah's actions have signaled, her prayer will spell out, and to that we turn to Samuel chapter 2.